I understand that you are all engaged in the MA program in education that is being offered here. This is the first batch, which is moving on to its final year after this phase is over. So you may have actually by the end of the year engaged with many issues. I don't know whether you look at teacher education at all as a focused course or part of any other course. I mean, is this an area that you have engaged with? The area of teacher education? No? Not at all.
So they know the status of teacher education in India. So
because I was asked by Professor Kaul to specifically focus on teacher education, so that's how I come prepared. It's
They have
actually
interest in teacher education, right?
Okay. Well, actually, it would be probably appropriate that teacher education is really looked at it as an entire course, because there's so much in it to talk about, to engage, to interrogate, to understand. But I'll try and see what I can do within this 1 hour of presentation, because it would be nice if we can also have a dialogue on some of the issues rather than I just talking to you and walking away. So let me begin with sort of background. Today's presentation is actually based on a paper that has recently been published in the India Infrastructure Report, which is brought out by the IDFC, and it's a report on education, and there are several different issues that it covers, and I've put in my paper in that report, which is a 2012 publication. I have a copy if anybody wants to see that. So let me begin with the background. We know that it's always a good idea for educators and for those who engage with education to look at the wider context in which we are located, to look at a much wider political, social, economic context, because after all, education is very intimately related to where we are located and what are the major policy frameworks within, let's say, the economic developmental areas that are impacting us. So there have been intense global changes, as we know, in the economy. There have been changes even in the socio-cultural dynamics of our society, because there's been a very fast pace of change that's been taking place, and we hear this on streaming television channels that talk about how, whether it was the incident of the Delhi gang rape or whether any such incident, how many of these issues are becoming very critical in terms of day-to-day engagement, because they actually reflect a very fast transition that's taking place in society. Politics, 1990, I think India went into the mode of coalition politics and never changed after that. And I think we are here to stay in terms of coalition politics, social relations, and these have impacted the education landscape. And let me explain how. I will sort of, in the course of the presentation, I will be able to explain that to you. If you look at models of development, which are largely now based on free market economies, our economy is also opened up. The free market has a much wider space, and these have certainly led to the widening of social inequalities. We know that India has always been a society of inequity, a society with their hierarchies, but I think this free market kind of an approach has led this gap to widen much more. So it has led to gradual withdrawal of the state from the commitment to education and health. Health, of course, is a sector that is now largely in the PPP mode, as they call it, the public-private partnership mode. But the education sector is also getting there, because there's a huge thrust of the government to take that as the way forward. The educational discourse, interestingly, and I'm talking of the educational discourse means what is being talked about, what is the language, what are our educational institutions talking about. And this educational discourse positions education as central to the national project, the project of the country to create an equitable and a just society. So you can see the juxtaposition the juxtaposition of a policy level due to a changed economic policy, due to a changed developmental policy, there's a withdrawal of the state and issues of inequities are becoming sharper. But in the educational sphere, we are talking about equitable societies. We are talking about how to bring education into this arena of creating social justice. The NCF 2005 thrust is diversity and equity, and the NCFTE also follows the same trajectory. So that's the paradox actually that we are in at the moment. So in practice, if you look at state instruments, what are the state instruments that fulfill the constitutional obligation, which now is an RTE of course, is the school system, the state school system. That is, in practice, it is the state school system that is going to fulfill the right to education, okay, which is provision of free and compulsory education. But while schools which are state schools are supposed to do this task, the teacher education institutes are 80% and more in the private sector, not in the state sector. So now you look at this divide, it's become so stark, right? And this is another divide which augments what I had earlier talked about in terms of the policy and the discourse. So the key challenge is that of instituting mechanisms that can improve and sustain quality of schooling, because quality has become almost like a silver bullet, because everybody is lapping it up, everybody wants to talk of quality education, but we are still not very clear as to what we all mean. Do we have a common vocabulary? Do we really understand quality, which is, something that we all agree with? I'm not very sure. But the challenge is that. The challenge is to bring quality of schooling and the operational linkage between a socially inclusive India, a humane India, I think pivots around a teacher who is empowered. Because to my mind, you may change textbooks, you may change curriculum, and I think we've done a remarkable job in this sector by way of the NCF initiative and the textbooks thereafter. No doubt they're cutting edge, many of our textbooks the world over, and yet we know that the text will be mediated by the teacher. And if the teacher is not really brought into the fold of a discourse that the NCF talks about, then we're going to be in serious trouble. And therefore I feel there is need to strengthen the public school system and the public teacher education system. The key challenges also are in terms of ideology coming into school curriculum. We know that NCF 2000, that is the time when NDA was the ruling party, so to speak, at the center, had created a furore, so to speak, through their initiative at reworking the school curriculum, which was the National Curriculum Framework for School Education in 2000. And that led to a lot of controversy, specifically with regard to the teaching of history. And these debates sort of came up, you may be studying about many of these issues. So it was for the first time really that a very blatant attempt was made to ideologically influence school curriculum. And therefore, as a result, I call it a blessing in disguise, because it is because of this that school curriculum actually came into the public domain for everybody to engage with, to actually question and understand as to what this is all about. That's one. The second is the burden of non-comprehension, which the Yashpal Committee of 1993 talks about. Not the burden of the school bag alone, but the burden that children can't understand. So it's a burden of non-comprehension. And of course, that the teacher continues to be disempowered because of the informalization of their employment. because of the para-teacher, the contract teachers, the fact that this cadre has swelled up over the years, ever since the degree. I think these are very key challenges that we continue to face today. There's also a sharp decline in the share of the public school enrollment. For example, we know that since the past 2 decades or more, there has been a movement of children from the state school system to the private school system. That private schools are mushroomed all over in many states. The share, therefore, of the number of children going to the state school system is declining because more and more private schools are coming up, and yet the figures, as I said earlier, is that more than 80% are within the state school system. Okay? But there is a decline. Also, the 2 things which actually Myron Weiner talked about in the year 1991 in his famous book called The State and the Child in India, and that was a book that I think almost everybody in India rejected. That was a book about India, written by a very famous political scientist, Myron Weiner. But that was rejected by almost every actor in India, including the bureaucracy and the academia, because that book spoke truths. It actually challenged the Indian system to believe and to understand that there is lack of political will in actually enabling education to play the role of social transformation. And there were 2 points specifically that I'd like to draw upon from Myron Weiner's arguments. One is low regard that teachers have for teaching. The fact that teachers actually don't enjoy their profession. The fact that teachers are not quite interested in even growing in their profession. I mean, and I'm not blaming the teacher here. I'll come back to that point. But I'm saying this is the existing reality, which Weiner talked about in 1991, and I think we're still facing this problem. And the lack of faith that teachers have in the ability of students to think for themselves, to think independently. That teachers actually think some students are not educable. That teachers actually believe that. And let's not shy away from reality. It's always better to confront it so we can deal with it. If we shy away, which is what we did in 91 when the book actually was published, is we tried to put it under the carpet. The other challenges are that the school teacher actually has been marginalized from the core agenda of political, social and educational development since independence. And I'll just quickly give you one. One, because post-independence was what is called the Nehruvian era. When Nehru was our first Prime Minister, but totally committed to modernizing India. The idea was to modernize, and modernization meant industrialization. From an agrarian society to an industrial manufacturing kind of a society. Now, with that agenda, Nehru was clear that we needed to focus on higher education, that we needed to focus on technical higher education. That's why the IITs came into being. And many institutes of higher education came into being at that time. And vibrant spaces that have done remarkable work, there is no doubt, whether it's the TIFR in Bombay, Institute of Science in Bangalore, or B.K.R. Rao's Institute in Delhi University. So there was a thrust on higher education institutions because of this whole agenda of becoming industrialized and modern. But in that whole agenda, the school teacher got totally marginalized because mass education was not a focus. And mass education means access to, commitment to elementary education, which is what our constitution had talked about even at that time. And RT was not in place, but there was a constitutional directive principle which said that we need to bring all children into elementary education by the year 1960, which obviously was an impossible target. Even now we're chasing targets. But the point is, the school teacher got marginalized because mass education was not a significant focus of early independent period of our country. And this actually, to my mind, laid the seeds for the intellectual isolation of schools from sites of knowledge. because sites of knowledge are higher education institutes. The business of higher education and the business of universities is to generate knowledge. And because the school teacher was marginalized, schools were marginalized, schools have always been left out of any engagement with higher education. And as a result, I would say that we had sown the seeds of intellectual isolation at that time itself. And therefore, our institutes of higher education and research never felt that they had to engage with school education. They never felt it was important to engage with school education, and this is a story that goes on even today. And I can tell you that many universities even now are opposed to the idea of why we started the BLed in Delhi University, because they feel that this is primary education, elementary. Why should higher education engage with it? Now that's something for you to look at and discuss amongst yourselves. Although NPE, which is 1986 new policy in education coming after 20 years, the first one was in 1968, it brought ideas associated with child-centered education, ideas associated with social transformation, ideas of social change, that women's education will be instrumental in bringing social change, that we need to make education child-centered. All these came up as important ideas in 1986 policy. But the fact is that innovations in education at the school level happened outside the state. They happened in NGOs. They happened through non-governmental organizations. So the discourse was there. The policy discourse came in 1986. Very, I would say, cursory discourse at one level, but it at least came into the policy arena. But innovations were happening outside the state system. The primary focus of large-scale education interventions continued to be on provisioning of schooling, physical access. Let's create more schools. We still suffer from that problem because there are still one-teacher schools, for example, and there is lack of proper building in some schools. But we've come a long way. We've come a long way by way of actual provisioning of and this continued as a focus, and the arresting of dropout rates, for example, with the DPEP intervention that started in somewhere in the early 1990s. We made that as a thrust. Short-term policy measures, however, led to the proliferation of an underqualified cadre of teachers, like we just talked about, para-teachers, contract teachers. But the funny thing is that we haven't stopped, even with the right to education, because there is a shortfall of teachers, and the right to education has created a new thrust. Let's get teachers into schools, because after all now it's a central legislation. But because of that, we are still in that state of crisis and hurry. We're always operating in a hurry. We're never operating in a planned manner, because we're always facing these exigencies. So even now under the RPE, there's a hurry to put contract teachers in place. Bihar has done that, 2.5 lakh teachers. Delhi is doing that, which is a capital, but it continues to do that. So this continues to be, as I'm saying, the dominant trajectory of achieving universalization. But what has also happened, another kind of very significant development which I think we need to look at very seriously, is what I call private for the poor. And scholars in India have written about this now. They've challenged this whole idea. The private sector expanded in many states, largely where the government sector was dysfunctional. So parents are looking for quality education. If parents find that this government school system is not working, then they're moving to private schools in search of quality. But we're not sure whether they're getting quality in those private schools. I'm not sure whether that's happening. But certainly that is in search of maybe elusive quality, right? For instance, figures tell us that states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan also have the largest number of out-of-school children, and that is where this movement is also happening, where private schools are coming up, and the school system of the state is becoming more and more dysfunctional. But that's a problematic situation when already you have a problem and the state is having other kind of problems which only sort of add and makes it more compounded. Studies indicate that Uttar Pradesh has the second highest distribution of private school enrollments in elementary education, as high as 57%. And in fact, Uttar Pradesh is a classic example. It's the largest state, of course. It has a classic example of low fee paying private schools. You know, private schools are also not homogeneous, right? They're all kinds of shades. So is the government school system. Even the government school system has a caste system. You know, we have the Kendriya Vidyalayas, we have the Pratibha Vikas Vidyalayas, which are very different from the NCP in Delhi. And of course, all over the state we have differences. But there is also a very active lobby that is working for the private school system. A very active lobby, and you may have heard of the name of James Tooley. He is one person who is actually advocating private for the poor all across, beginning with his work in Hyderabad, in Andhra Pradesh. And they're basically celebrating how the poor in India are educating themselves despite a dysfunctional government school system. And I think we need to pause and think whether this is really something that is making a difference to the education of the poor, whether it's really actually giving them quality education. I think we need to pause and think about these issues. The curriculum continues to be a contentious space. So I talked about ideology, for example. This is what happened in the mid-1990s, in the 2000s, but mid-1990s actually did see some experiments that had begun in some states. For example, the Gujarat. The Gujarat state actually went into revising its textbooks and none of the educators actually knew what was happening. There was a well-entrenched, ideologically grounded curriculum in place before the 2002 Gujarat so-called genocide happened. So we need to understand what happens when these kind of changes are put in place. Then of course there was the central effort of the NCERT 2000, and this was seen as a retrograde step. But the point I am trying to make here is that this ideological conflict came about in terms of school curriculum, but the teachers of schools remain outside this debate. Why? Because the voice of the teacher was hardly visible, hardly audible. Why? Because the teacher never felt that this was something that concerned her. So the debate in newspapers was happening between administrators, whether they were NCERT officials, and historians. It was not even happening between historians and historians. It was actually happening between administrators and historians. And in that whole debate, the voice of the teacher was clearly missing, when it should have been the concern of the teacher, because I am going to teach history. It should be my concern to know whether I am teaching history or I am teaching myth. What is the interpretation of history? What is the craft of a historian? These should be the concerns of a history teacher, but unfortunately, it wasn't even visible. So I'm coming now to the point of the neglect of the need for teachers and the kind of teachers that we can talk about. A political consensus around the need to universalize, of course, emerged with the RTE, and the RTE was seen as a very progressive step forward. No doubt, I think it is a very progressive step forward. But what is the frame within which we will actually enact this legislation and implement it was never clear. The frame within which this kind of questions of ideological contestation of curriculum, questions of what should be teachers' qualification, questions of how should teachers be prepared, what kind of design of curriculum for teacher education, those questions remain contested and perhaps not even engaged with in such a way that we come to a common understanding. So it is evident that deprivation of any kind of children not coming to school, not being able to attend school, is actually related intimately with the school participation of children, whether they actually participate, whether they are able to sustain themselves in school, and so on. Researchers have observed that teacher recruitment in most states remained frozen for many years. For example, Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh has not had teacher recruitment since the past over 25 years now. And Bihar, of course, has now taken many teachers into the fold, but contractual teachers who are being given a consolidated pay. They've actually now done away with the primary school teacher cadre, like Madhya Pradesh. So 2 states of the country now don't even have a cadre of primary school teachers. Okay? Now this is a very dangerous trend. And of course, as I said earlier, the effort was, because we want teachers, the argument was, it's better to have some teachers than to have no teachers. So it doesn't matter if teachers are not qualified with pre-service education, if they don't have essential qualification, at least we are doing something for those who are poor and we are able to reach out to them. A very well-intentioned argument. But actually that led to a system full of suboptimal teachers who actually did not have the training that would be required. So for instance, the most marginalized communities, and this is research which tells us, in specific blocks, if you take a state, one state, and you look at specific blocks across those states, blocks, districts, these are administrative units, you find that a much higher percentage of single teacher schools actually exist in certain blocks. So there's an unequal distribution also of where the availability of teachers. And you find that single teacher schools are within certain blocks, maybe with marginalized populations. The report of the RTE first year actually brought this out very well through maps. They tried to show which districts in a particular state, and they did this for the whole country, actually have populations more than 25% that are marginalized, SC/ST, or even Muslim populations where they are meant to be marginalized because of the minority status. And now there is an effort, of course, to look at development of teacher education within these pockets specifically. So there are 2 anomalies in the Act, in the RTE Act itself, which actually compound this problem. And even though the Act itself is a very welcome Act, and I think it's great that we've been able to achieve it, but I think it's important for us to understand what these 2 anomalies are if you're able to tide over these problems and go ahead. One is that the provision of the pupil-teacher ratio, which is 1:40, is based on school as a unit. It's not based on the classroom, which means that if you have less number of children, and the ratio is 1:40, you can still have 3 teachers, but you have 5 classes in a primary school. So if you can do with 3 teachers because you fulfill RTE norms, then it's not per classroom. That means still you will have to club some classrooms because you have only 3 teachers. So that is a problem at the moment. The second problem is that the RTE defines curriculum, defines a child, defines a community, defines a school, but it does not define the teacher. It leaves the teacher undefined. Now why do we leave the teacher undefined? For simple reasons. Because we have huge number of para-teachers. If we define the teacher, we will have to follow certain kind of norms, and we left it like that. So there's a studied science on defining the teacher. However, post-RTE, the NCTE, that is the National Council of Teacher Education, meant to be a statutory body and the competent authority to make sure that the teachers in schools have the requisite qualification, have notified minimum qualification for teachers, for all teachers. But what is happening is, because of the shortfall of teachers, because there's such a huge shortfall, it goes into lakhs. As a result, the states are not in a position, because they don't have the institutional capacities to train teachers, some of the states, especially in the northern belt. So what are they doing? They are trying to get exemption from the government of India so that they can recruit teachers without the qualifications stipulated by NCT. So, the point is that we seem to be, as a country, always working in the mode of crisis intervention. There's a crisis, and let's look at that crisis. Let's try and deal with it. Obviously, your strategies to intervene in crisis will be different from a strategy that will have a long-term vision. And I think if we continually operate in the crisis intervention mode, we will never plan long-term for a country. So that is the point I tried to make. Therefore, I thought that RTE Act itself should have had some of these things clearly stated. But, RTE has 6 clauses which talk about punitive measures. If teachers don't work, what you should do with them. But it did not have enough about the teacher and how we can professionally develop the teacher. So, according to a report of RTE, the first year report, 2011, 75% teachers are without professional qualification in the northeastern state. That's actually an area completely neglected for a long time. That's one. And now there are special packages actually that the government of India is trying to work towards for the northeastern states. They've woken up to this reality, and there are now several packages. Of course, it's not as if they were not there earlier. Attempts were made even earlier. But I think attempts were not made in a long-term vision. 61% in Assam, 51 to 30% in states of Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Uttar Pradesh, Odisha. So that's a large number of states that have this problem. And also inadequate teacher education development capacity, which means institutions are not there to train teachers. There are systemic gaps of another kind also. For example, the NCERT 2009 report tells us that 44% diets in the northern region, 58% in the northeastern region, 33% in the eastern region, that is Bihar, etc., West Bengal, 44% in the western region, and 67% in the southern region have 50% faculty positions vacant. So if you have to have a faculty of 23 or 24 people in one diet, you actually have no more than 11 or 12. So 50% vacancy in diets. How will diets function? And then we say that diets are not producing good teachers. How are they going to produce good teachers? So those are some of the systemic issues which we have to take into account. The other, of course, systemic issue with the private school kind of a trajectory is the corporatized understanding of quality. Like I said, quality, what it means is very amorphous. But there is a corporatized definition of quality that is emerging, which is teacher accountability, scientific management of education. And this, I think, is antithetical to the understanding of quality, which we would call as something inherent in education. Can we say that we can give quality education in some states and not quality education in other states? Education is something that belongs, quality is something that belongs to education. You can't look at it. I mean, as a product, you can say, when we go to the market and buy a product, and we say whether it has the ISI trademark because it's a quality trademark. Yes, you can look at quality in terms of a product, but can you look at quality as something severed from education, which education has to have a trademark of? I think there is no education without quality. And this is a point that Krishna Kumar argues very well in one of the papers where he writes how this idea that there should be quality education is a new idea. And it has come with the whole idea of the market. It's not something that we need to look at as we need to sort of go back into the times when, the best of minds, the best of philosophers talked of education, whether it was Bertrand Russell, or whether it was John Dewey, or whether it was Gandhi and Tagore. When they talked of education, they assumed that it is education of quality. And nobody talked of education as other than that. Then we have an entry of diverse players. With the corporatized understanding, we have various people coming into the education sector. First, we opened the education sector to donor funding. We had a lot of international donors coming. The Andhra Pradesh primary education program started in Andhra Pradesh. UP education program started in UP. Bihar started, and then of course we had the district primary education program, which started with funding from the World Bank and other donor agencies. Then we had international researchers also come in. They tried to do research. So there was a study done on teacher absenteeism, which talked of how teachers in India, in Indian school, remain absent. Of course, a concern. It is a very genuine concern, and I think we need to look at some of these issues very carefully, because after all, if the teacher is not in class, then what kind of professional development are we talking about? Then we had the players coming in from the managerial and technical kind of field. You know, the management people saying, we will tell you how to do your education. You know, we need management of education. So, in that whole approach, education got lost somewhere. So the perspective became as if, you know, management itself can take care of what is called the content of education. You know that it cannot be done. Then finally we come to what is called private-public partnerships, which is the mantra of the Government of India, and it's part of the 12th plan, because they're even in the 11th plan, but a greater thrust in the 12th plan. Since the 1990s, it's been there. This has brought into play a number of institutional interests, forces, debates from the international arena. So India has now been looking at the developed countries. What are they doing in education? Let's try and learn from them. Not a bad idea. We need to learn from each other. But what has happened is that there is a wide divergence between the socio-economic, cultural, institutional conditions of South Asia, where we are located, and the OECD countries, that is, all the European countries. The contexts are very different, but we tend to adopt the policy narratives from this international kind of discourse, and we apply it to our context. But I think that is where India has got into a problem, because there is a tendency to look at, let's say, Teach for America, which is happening in the US for some time, and so we have a Teach for India. It's a global network, but we are not realizing that a country like India has such deep inequities that we cannot afford to just have alternative certification programs, because this is not going to help us to reach our children and make them actually learn rather than just through the policy of non-detention be certified as having completed elementary education. So there are parallel discourses in education that are there even in the developed countries. What were the parallel discourses? One, the voice of the academia. So the academia, you may have studied in some of your courses. In the new sociology, for example, that has talked of the fact that schools are basically sites of social reproduction. That basically the school system, the formal education system, only reproduces the divisions in society that exist. So the school can't do anything. The school is helpless. Okay, that is one kind of a discourse that came with the new sociology. Then we had a postmodernist discourse. The postmodernist discourse actually challenged the very idea of knowledge. What is knowledge? Right? But somewhere in between, there was also a discourse that was called the resistance theory discourse that came after the new sociology, which said that if schools are sites of social reproduction, that means they are reproducing society, can schools not all be also sites of struggle, sites of change, sites of resistance, sites we can actually use to create change in society? So those came with the resistance theories. This was the academic discourse happening, but there was also a policy discourse happening, which was a different kind of a discourse. And this discourse came from the neoliberal policy, which India is also now going through. This discourse gave importance to economic efficiency, right? We are wasting too much. True, I think in India they all say that if India stops wasting the kind of things we waste, not only in education, everywhere, then we probably create another country. I mean, people jokingly talk like that. But it's true that there is a lot of stagnation and waste in many sectors in the country, and we need efficiency. We need to bring that kind of efficiency. However, this idea of economic efficiency is being linked with the educational framework of improved learner assessment. Meaning that in school education, we need to make sure that our children are learning. Fine, that's also a fine idea. Of course, we have to make sure that our children are learning. That they're learning to read, that they're learning to write, that they're learning to think critically, and they're learning to do basic mathematics at the primary level. But this idea has got completely shifted into an extreme idea, thereby saying that when we test children in a big way, large-scale testing across the country, what is called high-stakes testing also, then as we test children in a big way, automatically somehow the quality of education will go up. That the more you test, the more there will be a chance to enhance quality. This, I think, is a bit of a warped idea. The idea that education as a project is tied up to learning outcomes. That education is only about results in terms of performance. I think that is the idea that needs to be challenged, which the economists have tried to bring into play, because for economists, everything must have returns. So if we are investing in education, we should have a return. If we are investing in teacher training, we should have a return. But you and me, and all of us engaged in education, understand that education is a process, and that returns are slow, and that returns don't show tomorrow, and they will not show day after. They will show after a generation. Now, the reluctance, therefore, to invest in education has come straight from the economic discourse because of this lack of belief that education returns. And the only way we can ensure that there is a return is by testing children again and again. If we show learning outcomes are improving, we can show returns are happening. And that, I think, is a bit of a problem. Scholars observe, for example, that 81% of economically developed countries, that's a large number, and everyone comes in that, the European countries, Australia, US, and 51% of economically developing countries, where we also come in, have been using national assessments since 2006. So now everybody is into the game of large-scale testing. And you know that India also participated, 2 states of India participated in PISA. And now India is considering participating in PISA as a whole country. And of course we were bashed up for those 2 participating states because we did so poorly. The point is that we need to focus on what we are doing in education rather than testing children. I think that's the point that needs to be made. But neoliberal policies in India since the 1990s have also led to increasing engagement of the corporate sector in education, especially because the information technology is a new industry in India. We are an IT superpower. So we need knowledge workers. We need people for the IT industry. So if we need people for the IT industry, that means we need those people who have certain skills. So in this process, what is happening is that the very idea of education is changing. It's being looked at as something that is totally about skill development. So the success of the neoliberal growth model during the second wave, that is 2000, has led to a deep penetration of market-based reforms in the education sector. And in this, there is a redefinition of education that has taken place. Teacher accountability, learning guarantee, learning achievements, School management, driven by the corporate sector, has become significant constituents of the quality discourse. So now quality is being defined in terms of learning achievement, in terms of school management, and in terms of how learning guarantee program. Have you heard of a learning guarantee program? The Azim Premji Foundation started the learning guarantee program. Now the question is, can you guarantee learning? I mean, we can guarantee a pressure cooker to work, for the next 2 days. Can we guarantee learning? I mean, this was an idea that the Azim Premji Foundation floated sometime in the 2000s. Now, of course, they've abandoned that idea. I think they've graduated, they've gone into university, which is a very good thing, and I think they're doing some wonderful work also. But the Learning Guarantee Program or achievement surveys and of course now digital education have become focus areas of the corporate houses. So Teach for India, for example, has become a major thrust of the corporate sector, alternative certification programs, because we don't have to invest in teachers. And I think the crisis is deepening because the private educational initiatives of curriculum development are being advocated as cost-effective market solutions. I don't know if you're aware that there are many groups all over the country that are actually now developing lesson plans. They are developing blueprints for teachers. Educom is presenting things fixed on the blackboard in the classroom, modules are all presented. And some of us are being told that we need to actually create people who can work with organizations like Educom. I think there's a serious problem here, which means the shift is taking place in a very major way in terms of understanding the purpose of education. Tagore and Gandhi, the time when we were totally caught in a colonial frame, not that we are out of it completely even now, but at that time, when we were caught in a colonial frame of education, when students were being pushed into learning English because English was the language of the British government and they needed workers for the government, at that time, people like Tagore and Gandhi actually presented an alternative. And for them, the alternative was resurrecting education for its real purpose. And what was the real purpose? The real purpose of education was to enable a democratic society. A society that would be egalitarian, a society that will allow our own cultural traditions to sort of grow and develop, and a society that would be for the people, for the democratic functioning of communities. Now what has happened today is that the whole idea of education, which had a very intimate link with society, that education is for society, is for developing a kind of society, or for challenging problems in society. For example, challenging the hierarchies in society. Today, with the corporate sector coming in, with the neoliberal agenda coming in, with the free market economy coming in, the very purpose of education has shifted from its link with society to its link with only industry and employment. So the purpose of education today is create graduates who can find a job in the market. And the market is not necessarily an instrument that will change society for the better. The market is actually an instrument which only creates consumerism, and it will only create further divisions in society because some people can buy and the others can't. So, if you find violence in schools today, if you find violence on the streets today, I think we have to think whether this violence has anything to do with the market economy, whether it has anything to do with what the market is doing to our society and to our lives. So the question therefore is that in this whole endeavor of disaggregating complex pedagogic processes into simple routine tasks where you develop lesson plans and deliver it to teachers and let the teachers deliver that to children, we are actually taking away the essence of education, the very idea of education. We are taking the soul of education out, so to speak. And it's true that if you look at our TET results, the teacher eligibility test, which has become a new mandatory requirement, we find that no more than 5 to 10% teachers, or rather candidates, qualify this test. Okay? Now why is this happening? Obviously it is a poor reflection on our teacher education. It's a poor reflection on our general education also, because the test has subject knowledge questions. So that is something we need to think about. So the policy practice actually gets further divided. On the surface, there appears to be a policy consensus on many of these questions. The government is saying yes, we need to universalize, we need to bring every child into the fold of education with the RTE, and there is a very progressive discourse from the NCF and the NCFT. But issues of teacher education, redefinition of knowledge, and a complete redefinition of education itself, learner assessment, all of that is actually relegating the ideas of society and social justice to the margins. So what I'm trying to say is that with the shifting definitions of education, the whole idea of education and its link with society is becoming marginalized. It's becoming thrown away. And we need to revive education for social transformation. I'm saying that even though concerns of equity are tied up with questions of aims of education, the two have become divided and disconnected. And we also find this is critical in India, because in India there is a very fragile connection between educating teachers and higher education, as I said in the beginning. That universities have typically not engaged with teacher education. You know, the DLED is really only one such program that is located in a university to train elementary level teachers. Or you have the examples of the regional institutes of education of NCERT in the 4 different states. Those were the only examples. Otherwise, elementary teacher education is happening in state institutions, that is DITs. And DITs are not linked to higher education, right? Now people will argue and say, but secondary education of teachers is linked to universities, because B.Ed happens in universities. But actually if you look at the bulk of figures in the whole country, you will find that the bulk of teacher education institutes giving B.Ed, that is the colleges of teacher education, or the private institutes, are only affiliated to the university. They are isolated from the university. It's a mere formality of affiliation. So it's actually not happening in the campuses of universities. There is no interaction between those who train to become teachers and other liberal arts and science students and faculty. So the question therefore is that when isolation of this kind occurs, then you are developing a teacher who does not necessarily think, but a teacher who develops very straight-jacketed skills and just goes and delivers. And if you do not develop a teacher who can think, then actually we are doing a disservice to the whole sector of education, because it's that teacher who is disempowered is teaching those children who will therefore also be disempowered. So how are we going to break that vicious cycle? I think that's the question for us to look at. So there's been a bold attempt in terms of the RTE, but at the same time, there's also been, let's not forget, a whole social movement, or different kinds of social movements in India. For example, the Right to Information Act. It's a very bold initiative, right? Now, that's what's happening at the same time. That's the interesting story about India. There's a neoliberal agenda which is pulling down education, which is disconnecting education from society, but there's a progressive discourse that's talking about democracy and community participation. And this is coming at a time when education is being positioned as a national project with the NCF and the NCFT. But in India also we have a parallel discourse, the policy discourse and the discourse of the academia. So what is the result of this kind of a parallel discourse? The result is that there is a shift in the definition of education, and the policy and the practice interface remains disconnected. There's hardly any engagement to bring it together. And we are being pushed into forced choices. And what are these choices? The first forced choice is conflict between private and public. We are being forced to believe that the government school system is dysfunctional and we will have to therefore move to the private. It's a forced choice. The second forced choice is diversification and selectivity of the teacher workforce. It's alright if teachers don't have professional qualification, let them come and teach on a contractual pay. So we're being forced to take teachers without long-term investment in their training. We are forced to say, what should be the location of teacher training? Should it be a university or should it be a state institution? We are being forced because we are being told that there isn't enough resource, that we can't manage to train the entire elementary teacher education sector in the universities. We are also being forced to make a choice between a long duration program and a short duration program. Through the SSA, beginning with the DPEP, we have typically held short-term training programs for teachers. And now also the alternative certification that's coming is saying this, that in 1 year or in less than 1 year, we will be able to train teachers and you don't have to invest in long duration programs. But the NCFT and now the 12th plan and the Justice Verma Commission have recommended long duration teacher training programs. And then of course the other choice is whether there should be regulation or deregulation. You know, there was a time with the National Council of Teacher Education. It's a Parliament Act, I mean it's an Act of Parliament, it's a statutory body. There was a committee that actually recommended repealing the Act. The committee recommended that we don't need National Council because the National Council is only creating corruption in the system. Yes, at one level there was corruption, but you have to deal with the corruption rather than do away with regulation. Because supposing we do away with regulation, then we have the danger of ideology that captured curriculum. Ideology can capture teacher education. So I think we need to be very careful about these choices. So the challenge therefore is to resist making forced choices and instead invoke various political, social, educational means to widen the democratic space for developing informed practitioners who can assert their right to educate all children. And this is the last slide. The need is to establish an interdisciplinary platform. And that's one thing I think we need to look at because, you know, educating teachers means that you have to engage them with interdisciplinary approaches. We cannot assert that teachers can be made or prepared to think without an engagement with different kinds of disciplines. And I think we will need many different ways to do this. One way would be to introduce education as an elective subject at the undergraduate level. So if you're studying sociology undergraduate or you're studying science undergraduate, you can have science education as an elective subject. Because then at a young age, a student is exposed to the idea of education. And if she's interested or he's interested, then they can move into post-graduation, which means that we will have the possibility of young people coming coming into education to pursue as research rather than only through teacher education route. Because teacher education is one route of entering into education. But we should have other routes. We should allow an MSc in physics who after MSc has not done BA or BLA but wants to actually come and do research in science education. We should have openings for such a person. We should have openings for a philosophy person who wants to engage with education for research. Why do we have to have a rigid system to continue the way we have it today? Is that unless you have a school subject to teach, you cannot come into BA. So if I am a philosophy graduate or a postgraduate, I cannot come to the BA program because philosophy is not a school subject. And if I can't come into the BA program, I can never get into research in education. So the system is rigid. It doesn't allow talent to come in. It tends to breed inside itself. You know? I mean, there's a word for it. The word is called incest. You sort of breed within yourselves. Now, if you breed within yourselves, you're never going to allow new thinking to happen. And if you look at any subject, look at psychology. The best theories in psychology have come from those who never studied psychology. I mean, Piaget was a biologist. Sigmund Freud was a psychiatrist. Right? We have excellent psychophysics theories which came from physicists. The best of knowledge generation happens at the intersection of disciplines. Within a discipline, there is a tendency to get ghettoized. There is a tendency to get caught in the same vocabulary and terminology and a framework which disallows you to think out of the box, to think differently. And education is one subject, or rather one discipline, or rather meta-discipline, that cannot afford to remain dogmatic. Because education it encompasses all disciplines. At one level, it encompasses disciplines for the foundations of education, like psychology of education, sociology of education, philosophy of education. At another level, we need subjects to teach. That means I must teach history in school. I must teach physics in school. So I am dealing with disciplines at two different levels. I am dealing with the various disciplines to inform myself how to be an educator. And I am dealing with disciplines in order to teach that discipline in school. So education cannot afford to be ghettoized. And I think this would help us to develop and bring in talent in different ways. And it will help us develop not only teacher educators or teachers, but it will help us to develop curriculum developers. It will help us to develop pedagogues. We should have specializations. Somebody who specializes in science pedagogy, somebody who specializes in maths pedagogy. I mean, Homi Bhabha Center has a very interesting program which is research based, which is mathematics education program, a PhD. I think that kind of a specialization should be there at the master's level. Also, we should be able to engage our young students to specialize in areas within education. Otherwise, our master's programs tend to become generalist, because we need many different specializations within education to be able to develop the field and to be able to also generate knowledge. We don't want to create only school teachers. We don't want to create only those who train school teachers. We also want to create people who will generate knowledge, so that knowledge comes into our classrooms. Because right now, we are dependent on knowledge that comes from outside India. We need to create knowledge within the Indian context. And unless we promote research in education, we will not be able to do that. So the long-term goal would be to move away from standalone institutes of teacher education, very important recommendation of the Justice Verma Commission. Right now, all teacher education is happening in isolated ways. We need to bring it to multidisciplinary environments like universities, like colleges of undergrad studies, and it is imperative to also bring the private institutions under regulation so that we can have regular curriculum reviews. Because right now the private sector which is 80%, as I said, is more or less unregulated because they seem to be doing whatever they want to. In fact, many of them have 1 room, 2 room teaching shops and they give a BA degree, and some of them don't even have that 1 room. They come from Jammu, enroll students in Delhi, get them degrees and disappear. I mean, they're better than the virtual universities. They sort of seem to exist nowhere, not even in cyberspace. So that's it. I think this is just about all I have, and I hope I haven't bored you.